Welcome to the Going Green podcast. I'm Philip, this is Paul, and today we're going to have a look at rubbish.
Not actual rubbish.
No, we're going to talk about rubbish
Yeah,
and education. We had this lovely long weekend in the UK where we celebrated the Queens Platinum Jubilee. And it was a really spectacular, wondrous things. There were street parties, parades, events, and they were put on up and down the country, and they were really quite great. Yeah, even our little town of Hemel, it sort of did its little bit. It put on a fun fair, or that they arranged one. They put up a stage, and they got various things like a live band in. And they did that in the local park. And next to that, there was this beacon that we lit. We were a little underwhelmed on the size of it, I suppose.
well, yes, but what?
Yeah. And then fireworks to finish. And that was really good. But, as we walked away, we walked over quite a lot of litter. Yeah, there was rubbish. There were bottles. There were plastic cups. There were remains of half-eaten food, just abandoned on the field. And there were bins there. And
to be fair to the I say the bins, but to be fair to bins, the bins were, I wouldn't say full to the brim, but they were definitely
full to overflowing.
Yeah,
I saw quite a few bins where they then had a few extra bags put there, and they were also full. I saw a deck chair even there. Someone had obviously broken it and decided that rather than take it home, they'd leave it there. So, to me, some of the events were spoiled by simply the amount of rubbish that was abandoned by people.
yes, well, and one of the crucial things about all that things is the fact that you sort of, we can't say everywhere exactly. We can't even say that it wasn't sort of, let's pretend 90% of the people did throw their things in the nearest bins or place them near the bins, as in the disposal area, because obviously,
Or took them home with them.
or stuff's home with them. We're not saying that, but we were saying a lot of people just at the end of the night, stood up, walked off, leaving whatever they brought, as in all the waste they brought down, the plastic packaging from, food and bottles of drink, and they just left them there. And they essentially just walked off. And it was sort of, we could have, personally, we could have gone and picked it up and put it in a bin. But one of the problems we were suffering was because, well,
it was dark.
It was dark. And that's one of the reasons that essentially it happened, was because people got away with it, essentially because it was dark. And basically they just, they pretended it didn't exist. And so they just walked away.
It's not my problem. But if you went to the park in the next day, it was all clear. The council had got their litter men out, well, and women, and they had cleared the park. And it was back to sort of its, usual sort of good state. Now, the council did work. They did try and clear up all of this stuff. But there seems to be something that Paul and I talked about called pack mentality. You see someone throw away their rubbish, you might throw away your rubbish as well. But if you see someone littering, then, well, you're less likely to sort of put it away tidily in a bin, recycle. And that was the other thing we didn't see. We saw bins, but we didn't see recycling going on. And I felt that was a shame that our council didn't do enough of that. They do try and do recycling, but at an event like that, they could have easily have had more bins and a little bit more organisation. We had to say that their organisation lacked a little bit. They sort of worked on some bits really well, and then they didn't work out that people would come in cars and they would park everywhere
on the streets, on the side roads, all over the place. Yes, But yeah, it's one of those things where they put bins out. Now they didn't want you don't want to put necessary bins in the middle of the fields where in front of because people don't like sitting next to bins, and that's fair enough. The bins are smelly. You understand that one. So the bins were basically on the perimeter of the field where everything was happening. That's great. Fair enough. That's no problem. The number of bins probably was quite fine, but it was sort of there weren't mixed bins. They basically these were just ordinary, and then the recycling happened. Now you might find that they were just happy just to gather all of them up, and then they were going to sort through all the rubbish and actually then recycle what they can and not recycle anything they can't. I can't tell you what was happening at that point afterwards in relation to the waste.
But then do you think that was very likely that happened? Or do you think that they would just pick it up and they will just skip the lot? They will just send it to landfill?
Well, this is where they say they don't do it, except we know they do it because it's one of those things where you can watch the lorries and they go somewhere else. It's hard to actually formally trace, but we see it happen. So it's but some councils are better than others. So it's not all councils, but it's also we know some councils are worse than ours and who would actually put all the landfill because they haven't got a very good recycling policy.
And we have to say that our council actually do have quite a good recycling policy, much better than, for instance, the council where my mother lives. She lives in a different area, and their policies are not as good as where we are. So they do vary. But let's have a think about sort of what's causing this problem. People went to a party, they enjoyed it, but they didn't feel any sort of responsibility for clearing up. Street parties, there were various street parties going around, and from what we saw of those, they were really, really well organized. They had signs up. They had to have signs up to say the roads were closed. They got all these things out. People organized them. Food, it all came out. The tables, the chairs. They had various parties. We saw a beautiful one on YouTube where the Red Arrows visited. All right, it was a man with a cycle and he was holding his red arrows streaming down. It was good.
It was good. It was a good laugh. It really was. It was for the weekend of events and sort of activities. It was quite a lovely affair all round.
But at the end, the point I want to make is at the end of that, you couldn't even tell a party had taken place. The people did it in a street. They came out. They did everything in the street, and when they went away, they had ownership. It's their street.
And I was going to say their street party, their
responsibility, but they did take responsibility. They did clear up. But when we had a different type of one where this was just basically a picnic in the park, and you took your picnic in the park, you had some entertainment, and then they lit the beacon at 9:45-ish, and then they had some fireworks, and then there was all the rubbish.
Exactly. It is that sort of idea, that sort of, from the street party, it was their street party, whereas let's say the picnic in the park, it's more of a community or more a larger community of the people of the town in the park, you see. But of course, whose ownership of the park? Do the people take ownership of the park? And the answer is, well,
No,
which is exactly the problem. It is one of the things where, that's just how it goes.
although it is the people's park, it's a free park. Everyone can go in there. They can take their dogs for a sort of walk, technically on a lead, although you don't always see that. And you can go for a cycle in the park, and there was a free to enter funfair. You paid for all the rides, obviously, but it was free to enter because it's a free park. It's a public place. But the public don't seem to identify quite the same with their home, their street, and then it's their park, and it's perhaps it's too big. But what things could be done to try and help? Well, one of the things that you could probably do is have easy access to trash bins. And although there was one in the centre and there were ones on the outside, and where you could go and buy your hot dog, your fish and chips, they had bins there. But then people having queued up to buy them, they went and sat somewhere else in the park, and to sort of throw the stuff away, well, I'm not going to walk all the way back to where I got it from.
Yeah, that was the major one of the points, was the fact that sort of it was the not the travel distance, but it was sort of the effort to travel. People don't like, they like to be rewarded by doing the least amount of work. We've seen all over the place. This is one of the crux
Yeah,
of environmentalism.
we're all lazy.
Yeah. So surely the answer is perhaps making us lazy. What if the council put people with wheelie bins and they just wandered through the park every, I don't know, 15 minutes or every half hour? And then basically almost like a checkerboard, they walk up and throughout the field, and then people will just dump their river in these litter wheelie bins, these mobile bins.
We've seen this when we've gone to various sort of events and parties. We go to places, well, we used to go to things like barn dances. There aren't so many now. And at the end, you have a sort of either a bring and share lunch, or someone provides some sort of meal. And at the end, someone comes round and they collect all the plates, they collect all the knives and forks, they collect all the rubbish. And as you leave this place at the end of the evening, you can't tell that anyone's been there. Everything is put back pristine, just as it was. There's ownership, and there's responsibility, perhaps because you've paid for something, and perhaps because you haven't paid for something. That's why people don't take as much notice. Now, there was one thing I did think that our council could have done, and that was, in this party, they basically had a stage where various events were taking place to entertain the people during the evening, before the lighting and before the fireworks.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
they didn't have an MC, a compere. Towards the end, they actually found one. They found this young girl from we think she was from a dance group, and she stood up and she went on and she tried really hard.
Now,
But if she'd been organised and trained, she could have said, and pick up your litter and take it with you.
yeah. Now,
And they might have done it.
yeah, exactly. Now, admittedly, one of the points is the whole event of things going on. There was actually someone doing that. Unfortunately, he wasn't there at the end, which is quite a interesting thing. Why was he not all the way through? I'm not going to ask and question it. I'm just merely spouting why. And so it was there was not this person, and suddenly it was left to I say it's a random person, but it wasn't. It was someone who basically had a loud mouth.
She tried very hard.
Yes.
She was quite amazing. I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah. But, so it's one of those things where now one of the major things we talk about is to stop littering. We basically need to educate people on why littering's bad. And, there are numerous things talking about why littering's bad, and everybody knows why littering's bad. But they still do it, even though they know it's bad. And it is that, do they make a difference knowing if you shun them into saying their littering's bad, they might actually learn from that thing. It's one of those things where the consequences of littering are rather poor. You hear all these things where there are these new fixed penalty notices about littering and environmental damage you can be got for. And the council have got these new environmental officers who basically should wander around to police the environment, to give out these fixed penalty notices about. I just haven't seen any done. Or
They could have been there. They could have been doing something, but I didn't arrive till later because I just went down after work to basically, although it was a bank holiday, I still had to work. And basically, when I got down there, ready for the lighting of the beacon, it was already getting dark. But there weren't people around doing the policing of this. I didn't see anyone. I did see some man trying to empty some of the bins, and he came with his little bin carrier thing, and he got there, and there were 6 full bins, and he wanted to pick up sort of a little bit and put it in his bin, and he just he'd already filled it all up. And so there wasn't a lot he could do. It lacked organisation. And I think this is one of the greatest things we can actually do. It isn't necessarily just education, but it is trying to get people aware.
Yeah, I was more saying it's more about thinking about doing these things. You know,
Yeah.
You get an event, you've got to actually think all the way through. You know, we're talking about, I'm going to have a moan at the council talking about they did this, but they didn't think about parking. You know, and they had plenty of opportunity. There's a whole field that was empty with access to the road they could have used for parking. Oh, by the way, that would have to be parking attendants or all these extra things. You know, but that was something to think about. You know, it's one of those things where if they'd done something about it, perhaps it wouldn't have been so bad and actually been a better event or a bit more on or organised. You know, so it's one of those odd things where
I think it is organisation, and organisation is part of the education, what was going on. So basically, if the council had said, right, what we're going to do is we're going to have our environmental officers walking around, we're going to have this MC saying, and pick up your rubbish, take it home with you. People then think, oh, yes, that is my rubbish. Yes, I will take it away with me, rather than just sort of leaving it there. If they'd had people walking around with bins, collecting rubbish, then people would use them. And if you came around with 2 bins, one recycling and one ordinary rubbish, and you say people, recycling in here, rubbish in there, you do force people to do it. But it is this more constant reminder, constant persuasion, forcing people, if you like, to do something. Because if you leave people to their own devices, then things don't work, which is why we need perhaps legislation to get some of these things to work better. There was this litter strategy for England, came out in sort of April 2017.
17, yes.
And that's all about fly tipping. This idea of trying to stop people just dumping whatever they've got sort of wherever they feel like. You can dispose of things quite easily in this country, and generally you can get rid of an awful lot for free. We've got sort of
waste disposal. A waste disposal centre, which is essentially your instead of doing like your local bins round in the dust carts, is actually there's a centre that actually deals with waste, and we're talking about things from furniture to
TVs,
all sorts of
fridges.
Yeah, you name it, they'll get rid of it, and then they'll organise.
So you take your stuff to this recycling centre. You drive your car there. Some places you have to sort of book in. Others you just queue up. Ours seems to do a queuing up system, and you go in there, and they've got in front of you. They're not wheelie bins. These are massive bins.
Yeah,
these are containers. And it says, all wood goes in that one. All sort of paper goes in that one. All sorts of other things go in each different one. And you watch people, and they do really try hard to put all those right bits in the right place. And there are people around there helping. And it's the people around there helping that also says basically, well, yeah, you will put that in there. You won't just dump it all.
Yeah.
And that works. So maybe we need better education for people to, or if it isn't education, policing.
Yeah, it's hard to say and describe sort of, you see all these people on the, on the highways, who's policing littering on the highways? All the motorists who throw their waste out, and then you've got the highways who come along and they have to do all these litter picking around. If their high people didn't throw it out, then they couldn't. But you can't spot the litterers to police them, and except the motorways, they're all got cameras on. Could they be doing that now? There's a bit more of a police state, but that is something. If you saw these notices being given out, or there was reports on people have been fined for littering, then you're more likely saying, oh, they actually are catching people who are doing bad things, doing littering. Is to actually saying, right, well then,
getting people out doing community service is good, especially if you can see a whole group of people going through the town, clearing it up and doing community service. This, it does bring home to some people that, you ought to do something. A lot of people, most people, take responsibility for their litter. And there are a few that don't. And the few that don't are the ones that don't listen to this podcast. They don't listen to, well, anything really.
Yeah.
And they're not interested because it's not my problem. And unfortunately, the answer is yes, it is your problem. And we have to try and persuade people that it is their problem. It is their planet. There is no planet B. You've only got what you've got here. And if you want to live in a complete mess, then, you can. But you shouldn't inflict that on other people. I've got a father-in-law, and his idea of tidying beggars belief, basically.
Yes. But it's one of the things where, all right, let's change it round. Could you not necessarily punish people for littering? Why don't you reward people for actually putting stuff in the bin? Now, there's lots of, I say methods of doing so, but one of the hilarious things is they, some council put new bins out, these bins ready, and as soon as someone put a bin in, it played a little tune. I guess it was designed for kids, and they're not displaying anything. But of course, the kids were happy, and they were running around picking up litter, throwing it in the bin, and had the bin play some sound to them.
And they like that.
And they like that. And it's all right. How do you make that more? I say more adult or anything like that. But there are
quite a lot of adults liked it.
Yeah, but there was one of those things where if you threw a sort of bottle away, you get a pound coin or something.
When I was a child, we used to get a drink. And when you used to get a drink, you paid a deposit for the bottle. And when you wanted the next bottle, you brought your bottle back, you got your deposit back. And so the bottle was brought back and it could easily be recycled, but people got a reward for it. They got some money back. All right, they paid for it in the first place. So maybe they paid an extra, in this case, 50p. Had to be worth it. And then they got their 50p back. So once they spent their original 50p, they didn't really pay for it again when they bought another drink, because they got their money back on the bottle and they paid it back again on the next bottle.
Mm-hmm.
So they only basically paid for it once, and when they'd finished, they took it back and they got their 50p back. And that was great. When we did this in the school where I grew up, there were no bottles and there was no litter. There were no bottles because of the deposit scheme, and there was no litter because any child who did was executed publicly, usually with the cane. 6 or 12 of the best. And it worked. the school was neat and tidy everywhere you went, and people were proud of the school. Deposit schemes do work, but also getting rid of all the packaging is a big problem. And if you read my blog, you'll see that today I was talking about how many new chemicals have been discovered coming off of packaging. And it's actually a frightening number. And if you're going to try and avoid all this, then you need to avoid getting as much packaging as you can. And, well, are there ways of doing it? I go to the supermarket, I buy my meat, it's already sort of cut, packaged and presented. But I can also go down to the market, and there's a very nice butcher, and he's got everything ready, and he just chops it into whatever you want. You know, you want a slice of steak, here we are, sir, how do you want it, thin, thick? And he'll cut it for you, and it's not packaged, and it just goes into generally either the bag you've brought with you, or, well, there are other sort of packaging that he has got that will do it.
Yeah, usually you talk about it's the brown paper bags, or I say quite large.
He uses a lot of paper bags because it's sort of better. There were the old days, I remember, of fish and chips in newspaper. Oh, you mustn't do that now. No, it comes in these sort of polystyrene awful things.
Yeah, and you know, one of the major things is there have been movements to stop you. You know, you hear all these lovely campaigns in schools about trying to remove these packaging and use silly things like not egg cartridges, but all these pulp ones that basically are biodegradable, and therefore, let's pretend if there was litter, right, then
it's going to dispose of itself almost, isn't it?
Yeah. So the idea that the littering cause a problem is then solved because, of course, it's going to biodegrade itself in the environment, and so you don't have to worry about the thing living, or I say living, being there for the next 50 to 100 years, which is the problem of litter, is that it is
and plastics,
plastic. Whereas this stuff, you can have it in the environment, it will just biodegrade, and what's the problem with doing that? And that's the solution long term, is to say, let's have our packaging done in this, biodegradable way rather than plastic. We moved on to the sort of age of disposable items. We can throw things away, but of course now we're throwing things away that we shouldn't have thrown away. So if we are going to throw them away, let's make the throwing away, or where they end up, a better place than they started with.
We have a problem then with something called peck mentality, isn't it? That people do what everyone else does. If you can set a good example, if you can get things going, you can perhaps influence people, you could change their attitudes, then we make the rubbish almost go away. It can be taken home, it can be recycled, and perhaps we can get rid of it, not altogether, but we can reduce the amount. So that's where we are at the moment. Rubbish. Now, what are we going to do about it? Well, basically, it still comes down, I think, to education. Trying to persuade people that this is the better way of getting rid of it. Take it home, recycle it, sort it out, and perhaps not use so much.
But the other half of it is if you're doing things, organizing things, is the education inside all the organization. Reminding the organizers of events or things, is to say, to plan for rubbish, and as soon as you've got a plan for it, you can deal with it, because then you're not reliant on people, or more precisely, include the people inside your plan. And that way you might find that you don't have to work hard on forcing people. They'll just happily go with your plan.
You've been listening to the Going Green podcast, talking about rubbish and education. We'll be back next week with another item on Going Green. Until then, it's goodbye from me and
A goodbye from me.
bye-bye.
Bye.